Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, here's the list. We're talking about all this stuff, including the TV Repack, analog service being shut off in Norway and other countries too. On-demand radio, is it a big thing? And the main studio rule. Doug Irwin is our guest right here on TWiRT. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcast Supply Worldwide with a great selection, discount prices, and same-day overnight shipping at bswusa.com. By the new Ruby console from Lavo with AutoMix Smart Mixing. See Lavo in your future at lavo.com/TWiRT. And by Direct Current, broadcast e-newsletter. Get Direct Current in your inbox every Thursday with technical pointers putting you and your facility at an advantage. Hey everybody, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack here, your host. Host with the most. It's our 384th episode of This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to the light bulb at the top of the tower. And see, you know, it's been years. I keep promising to get my beacon working. It's right out. It's right out in the garage. It's right out there, and I promise I'll get it working sometime. And I'll stick it back here somewhere. Maybe replace this lamp with, or replace the lava lamp with an actual beacon. Won't that be something? I'm not sure when I started promising that. Probably on episode 200. So I need to get to that. Our show is brought to you by three wonderful sponsors, the folks at Lavo, at Broadcast Supply Worldwide, and at the Telos Alliance. And I hope that you'll pay attention to their ads and patronize them. If there's something they have that you need, go after it. All right. Chris Tobin is with us, but he is a little challenged on the connectivity right now. So we're going to check in with him a little bit farther down the road. We just checked in with him before the show started, and he's getting some bad data. So we're going to check back in with Chris shortly, or in a little bit. But I want to bring in our guest, because you're not going to have to listen to me for an hour. We got somebody to chat with, and that is Doug Irwin. Doug has been on the show before. Welcome in, Doug. Glad you're here.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me back. And by the way, I actually have a beacon in this office. I wish I could show it to you. It's in the back in the corner, but it actually is a real tower of light that came off of a tower that folded over in the middle of the night one night, and the beacon on the top of the tower smashed into the ground into a million pieces, but this one was left hanging in the air, so we salvaged it, and it's in here now.
Oh man, I don't remember how in the heck I got this beacon. Some transmitter site that Delta Radio owns, I guess, and we just didn't have any way to use it. You know what we ought to do? We ought to have the beacon challenge, whereas the next time, Doug, that you're going to be on the show, maybe a few months from now, maybe a year from now, whatever it happens to be, we can share, we can show and tell our beacons. How about that? Wouldn't that be good?
I'll put it in the background. It'll be like up there, at least for this part of the show. You know, it'll be great.
Yeah. Now my plan is, I've gotten rid of the 600 and some watt bulbs. What are they, 620s? Is that the standard beacon bulb, 620? And I'm just going to put some LED, 100 watt LED incandescent lights in there.
That's what ours has. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been flashing. Cool. It's been flashing there for like 2 years, sitting back in the corner.
Really?
I've had some people ask me, well, does it mean anything? Because if you drive on the freeway, you can see it. You can see it in the middle of the night. You drive by and there it is, and people think, well, does that mean everything is okay, or does that mean there's a problem?
Really? Yeah. You drive out, you see it enough of it, the glow through the window?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. That is amazing. So here's what we're gonna hear from our first sponsor in just a second here, but Doug and I are going to be talking about FM stations and how they get negatively affected by the TV Repack. And we did a TV Repack a few years ago. We're doing another one, and I'd like to know some things about what that looks like for stations. I know there's at least one station here in Nashville, maybe more than one, that's going to be affected by that. Also, we're going to be talking about turning off analog services. I feel sad about that, and yet technology moves on. I mean, there was a day when someone have desired to be a buggy, to be a driver of a horse-drawn carriage. What do they call that? A drover? And not anymore. It's not a career. So no use for that. On-demand radio. We're going to talk about that and how workflows have changed in the main studio rule, and how Doug has been getting his IT people to think more about audio and keep things going, and maybe how others have adjusted their expectations too. So anyway, all that's coming up on This Week in Radio Tech. And so Suncast is standing by, our producer. He's going to roll our first sponsor's message. Take it away.
There has probably never been a better time in history to buy a new radio mixing console. Today's consoles are more sophisticated than ever, with more features and functions than you can shake a stick at. But have you noticed how complicated they are? There's a sea of knobs and switches and displays and buttons. Some of them look like you might need a pilot's license to do your show. Well, a board doesn't have to be complicated to be powerful. Just look at the new Ruby mixing surface from Lavo. The first thing you notice is how smooth and streamlined it is. Ruby has lots of cool tech, but what it doesn't have is that confusing ocean of buttons that clutter things up. Now, we all know that there are some console features the jock only uses once in a while, so why dedicate controls to them? Ruby fixes this problem by moving those once-in-a-blue-moon controls to a touch-sensitive, customizable GUI that happily shares screen space with your other studio software, helping you fight control room clutter. Thanks to this design innovation, talent that use Ruby produce smoother shows with less errors. Controls that are used the most fall naturally to hand, while functions that rarely need adjustment are easily controlled with just a couple of clicks in the context-sensitive GUI. And Ruby has cool features you won't find on other boards, like Auto Mix, an intelligent gain writing function that guarantees the perfect mix for multi-mic morning shows and call-in segments. Dual mode snapshots that instantly switch the motorized faders between on-air and production modes, and enough DSP and I/O options to make even your pro sound pals green with envy. And because quality is as important to Lavo as it is to you, every console is proudly built to fanatically precise standards at Lavo's own factory in Germany. If you're ready to declutter your control room, do yourself a favor. Check out the new Ruby and the other cool Lavo radio tech at www.lawo.com/TWiRT.
Thanks to Lavo for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Kirk Harnack, Doug Irwin, we're both here. Chris Tobin is working on seeing if he can get any better connectivity. We'll check in with him in a little bit. And right now we're going to talk about FM stations and getting inconvenienced by this TV repack. Doug, can you first of all kind of give us a little wrap up on what TV repack means? When is it going to happen, and what does it entail for TV stations?
Well, I mean, the repack has essentially started now. TV stations on the West Coast, or in California at least, are making their plans and probably already have all their plans formulated. As I recall, there's two critical times for them next year. One of them is towards the end of the first quarter. I don't quote me on these, because since I'm not involved in television, I don't know exactly. But it seems like the critical times are next April and December. Mm-hmm. So they have a time period where they're going to be testing and so forth and have to be done. I not having dealt with the television stuff, I don't know the rules exactly what the time frame is, but I do know that we're working to be ready for what we're doing by the end of spring. So in the case of Mount Wilson, there are a lot of TV stations and a lot of radio stations that are all packed into a pretty small area, relatively small. And we all have to reduce power if someone has to work on the tower or climb the tower to do work on the lights or aux antenna or whatever else. So in this particular case, TV stations that are changing frequencies, and there's several of them, are going to be replacing antennas. There's one combined antenna that's going to be coming down and replaced with a single channel antenna. Mm. And every time that happens, we are forced to reduce power, and our company would prefer to have more control over the situation. So we are actually in the process of building another transmitter site up near Mount Wilson. It's at a place called Deer Park, which some of you may know as CBS Lane. CBS Television used to transmit from there. They moved up the road to what we really call Mount Wilson, but there's a spot called that people used to call CBS Lane. It's a 900-foot tower. If anybody is watching is familiar with Mount Wilson, there's a 900-foot tower that's to the west of the main grouping of Mount Wilson stuff. That's where we're talking about. And there's a shorter tower immediately next to that, and that's where we're going to end up going. We're kind of taking over that tower, and we're going to have a combined antenna on top of it. But it's going to affect a lot of stations. Ours probably really aren't that bad. I know some are going to be. There's one station here in LA that their antenna is close to top of a tower where a whole combined antenna is going to go. So they're going to be off the air from that antenna anyway. They can't use that antenna for several months. So you can imagine if you're being told by your landlord, hey, your main antenna, you can't use it for 2 months. Sorry, figure something out. So that's the worst, the nightmare scenario. Fortunately, we're not faced with that, but we're still reacting by building a transmitter site where we can stay on the air and not really be affected by climbers going up and down the tower and so forth.
Wow. Okay. So I found a document online, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's from the NAB. It begins with a letter from Patrick McFadden, who's the Associate General Counsel of the NAB. And it is a report done by John Gray and Doug Vernier of Vsoft Communications. It's called FM Stations Affected by the 2017 TV Band Repacking Plan. And so it shows the TV and FM stations, I guess because they're co-located, by dint of being co-located, what FM stations have to think about, have to talk about, ask about, hey, are we going to have to go off the air, reduce power, go to a different antenna, a different site? What? When you, TV station whose tower we're on or we're sharing, has to make changes. Now, so often we find, and Doug, I guess, tell me if the same thing in your neck of the woods. Typically on a tower, on a multi-tenant tower, the TV stations typically get the top, and FM stations oftentimes are side-mounted somewhere on the antenna. Is that generally true where you are?
We have a lot of tower tops. That's not necessarily true, but still, the TV stations have a lot of pull, as you can imagine. They have a lot of space. They're paying a lot of rent, and they are paid very much attention by the site landlords. And so, but we have formal agreements with everybody, essentially saying, hey, we need to reduce power. We'll do it. If you need to reduce power when we're doing something, you'll do it. So that's the modus operandi, and that's the way it's been for years and years. So, but no, I can't really generalize and say that they're on top of all the towers.
Okay. Well, it tends to be that way around here. I don't know if, or they're at the same level. If you've got a candelabra type tower that's got typically 3 arms at the top, you might have a couple of arms of TV stations, but you might have an arm that's got some FM or combined FM stations on it. One of the biggest stations here in Nashville, one of the biggest towers, I should say, happens to be all FM, and there's about 5 different FM stations on it. So I'm guessing there's no effect there, but there are plenty of shared use towers. This document that I found, again, I'll post it on the show notes. I was just looking for Tennessee, and yeah, there's several here in Nashville that are affected. Now, the details of what that means, don't know, but supposedly these are TV stations that have to change frequency, which probably implies changing the antenna or antennas or combined master antenna. And then the FM stations would have to do something about that. Hopefully people have backup, plans, or at reduced power, their coverage is still pretty good. But man, tower work like this can take a while. It can take, if not days, it can take weeks to swap out a big television antenna, and that's why this could be a big deal. Any further comments on that FM repack or TV repack?
Well, I think here in the West Coast, we have a lot of situations where towers are on top of mountains, and so unlike what you're talking about in Nashville or in anywhere probably, east of the Mississippi, where there are real tall towers, and a lot of those towers are probably sponsored or owned by the TV station, so naturally they're going to be on the top. But here, the situation is much different with towers that are probably 150, 200 feet tall, maybe 300 feet tall for the most part. It's mixed. Some are the TV antennas are on top, a lot of them are on the side and so forth. But a lot of the aux antennas are changing as well because of the frequency changes. So you've got a kind of a double whammy there. It's like, well, hey, we're going to change our aux antenna, and then later we're going to change our main antenna. So you've got two different projects, and depending on what the power level is, they may be changing their transmission line out. You never really know. And we're looking at we're thinking probably 20 days of work's what we expect to have happen up there. That's kind of an educated guess. It could be a little bit less, could be more, but we're looking at 20 days. So we would prefer to operate under a site where we've got a lot better control for that amount of time. So that's what we're doing. But I'm sure there are a lot of other situations that people are finding it difficult to plan, but it's coming up. It's very soon now.
Good deal. All right. Well, let's move on. Analog services. We started hearing about this a couple of years ago about Norway. Norway saying, hey, we're going to shut off analog FM transmitters. Now, that the headline was kind of broad, the ones that I read. I'm sure you wouldn't write one like that. But we found out that it was the government services that said, we've got enough listeners, enough coverage with digital services, and it's time to shut off analog service. So that has already happened in Norway, correct?
That's happened in Norway for the national FM networks. So, like the public radio, like the equivalent, I guess you'd say the equivalent to NPR, but government owned. Yeah, those are all been shut off, and that's been happening. That's happened in December. It was all finished in December. It kind of happened over the course of the year. And if you follow what a lot of people are saying about the results, they're not all that thrilled. There's a lot of material out there saying the listeners are unhappy. And you have to take everything. You've got to take everything with a grain of salt. I mean, you have to read multiple sources. You can read sources from the government itself, radio.no. They, of course, paint a very bright picture of the way things are going. They have said there's less listeners than there used to be, but it is true also that people are buying radios like crazy over there right now because they want to be able to go back and pick up the stations they're accustomed to getting. So hopefully the trend will remain in such that there will be more radios for people to listen to, more DAB radios, and listenership will creep back up to where it was and maybe even get better. Local FMs around Norway did not have to shut off, and they're going to be on the air. Well, they could be on the air at least until December of 2021. Although I know there's at least one station that has gone off. I've got a colleague that lives over there who worked in broadcasting, and he gives me the scoop about what's really going on over there. And at least one station is just folded because they couldn't make it anymore.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. You mean, what was it, a commercial or a government station that folded?
It's a local commercial station, and I can't remember what it's called right now. But anyway, some of them have gained listenership. A lot of them have gained listenership, actually. So I don't know why this one particular one couldn't make it, but they didn't.
Yeah. Interesting. But it could have been related to the FM turnoff or not. So in Norway, you alluded to DAB. Is that what they're using? Like your Rico 147, that kind of DAB?
Yes, exactly. And it's DAB plus, which basically means it uses AAC for the codec. The original DAB system, which we would have talked about 20 years ago that they were using in Canada, for example, I believe that was MP2. So
yes,
what they're using now has a lot basically better sound quality for a given data rate. And I've also been told, and I can't really I can't say I know what it sounds like, but I have heard from others that, of course, the people who are transmitting on the MUX jam as many programs on there as they possibly can. So, of course, everybody has to kind of suffer because the data rate goes down every time they add a new station. I mean, it's like a budget for the data rate. And so, if you add 2 more stations, everybody else has to give up some of their data rates, that kind of thing.
Now, interesting, I did get to spend some time in Australia where they've rolled out quite a bit of DAB. And it's okay, and they can transmit pictures. A lot of the radios have a little screen, so you can see album artwork, or you can see a picture of the morning crew, or maybe a graphic of the weather forecast while you're listening to that, or be shown a website address to go to for a full newscast or whatever. And there, every broadcaster received a certain amount of data, a certain cut off of the MUX. And honestly, I forget, was it 128? Was it 256? I'm sure some got more than others. But the point was, then the broadcaster could decide for themselves, do we want to run 1 program on our amount of data, or 2 or 3 or 8, And my experience in Australia was actually fairly good. I think the lowest data rate that I heard was probably 64 kilobits per second. Correct me if I'm wrong, Australians. There may be some running less than that. But if they're running, at least my experience has been, if they're running HEAAC, high efficiency AAC, especially HEAAC V2, if that's an option, and I know that some of the high efficiency modes are part of DAB plus, you can get really decent entertainment quality in the 48 to 64 kilobit per second range. Not sure I'd want to listen to a full day of concerts, classical concerts. It may not be that kind of precision listening, but frankly, listening to top 40 stations and just typical music and news, I find it just fine. Not perfect, but it doesn't bother me too much to listen to that all day long on a decent radio. So anyway, it's interesting that in some places, they add more and everybody gets less. In other places, everybody gets a certain amount and they can use it how they want. Interesting. So So you also mentioned England and Germany proposing to cut off some analog services. Is that right?
Well, there have been a lot of medium wave stations in Germany that have been shut down. I'm not sure that Germany's doing any more medium wave AM at all right now. And in England, I know that BBC is trying to shut off some of theirs. I think they were trying to go from 95 to 85% coverage of the country. Now, those programs that are on those AMs are available, on DAB and via streaming, obviously, and probably via FM, and in some cases also digital television. So it's not like you suddenly won't be able to pick up a certain program. It's just that there are so few people listening to the medium wave over there that they're figuring it's not worth it. I mean, it's not worth it to pay for the electricity to maintain the site and so forth. So it's unfortunate, but that's, as you said earlier, technology rolls along. So that's what's happening. It's a little bit more difficult over there. They have to, there's an organization called Office of Communication, which is part of the UK government, and they have to basically give permission for stations to do that. So it's a little bit more strict, I believe, than we practice in the US anyway.
Yeah. So I noticed for the last couple of years or so at the trade shows, whenever I visit transmitter manufacturer Nautel, they were very happy. They won a contract in Hungary a couple of years ago to build them a 2 megawatt AM transmitter. And on Nautel's website, there's some pretty pictures of the combiner. It's interesting technology there. Maybe Hungary had a little premonition. Hey, with all these AM stations going off, our coverage could be fantastic if we're the only people on the air with 2 megawatts. But they're
well, not only that. Yeah, it's on. I think it's on 580 or 590 kilohertz. So you can imagine not much power. I don't know about the ground connectivity, but I understand you can hear that all over Europe and even over to North Africa. So yeah, it's really getting out. You mentioned Nautel. Of course, Nautel is really big into DRM, which is Digital Radio Mondial, and that is a digital means of for broadcasting in the medium wave band. Actually, they have a VHF system as well, but you probably know that India is really gone with DRM to a huge extent on their AM system, and Nautel has sold a bunch of transmitters in India as well, large ones like 200, 400 kilowatt DRM transmitters. So, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned DRM. Actually, I just read here this 2 megawatt AM transmitter that Nautel built for Hungary. It says it's DRM enabled. Now, I don't know if they're initially using it in an amplitude modulated mode or in a DRM mode. I don't know which. But either way, that's interesting. I thought I asked some folks from India about DRM. Now, one of the people I asked was kind of a negative Nelly anyway, but he told me that uptake has not been what they want, mostly because of a lack of available variety in DRM radios. Do you know anything about the DRM radio availability?
I have heard the same thing. I understand there's only like one Indian manufacturer of DRM radios, as far as I'm aware, and why there aren't more, I don't know. However, I mean, you think about the size of the market there. I think India has got populations, more or less 1 billion people. So you've got a huge market, and why there aren't more manufacturers of DRM radios, I have no idea. But the DRM organization will continually say, it's coming. We're trying these new radios out. And if you read about their trade shows and so forth, they always make sure they tell you that this is the manufacturer of the radio, the receiver. We're going to have it here. You can listen to it, blah, 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 of course. But I think you're right. I think receivers' access is still really limited.
We'll link to this page also. Nautel talking about high power DRM medium wave AM in India. They call this building for $1 billion. I thought India had like 1.3 billion, but it's a lot. And they first went on the air there back in end of May of 2014. So right around NAB time 4 years ago, or just after. So it's been almost 4 years since the first one went on. And I wonder in India, they have FM radio in their cell phones very typically. So I just wonder, and cell phones are fairly cheap. The plans are fairly cheap. Of course, the FM radio, listening to that is free. on your cell phone. So I just wonder how that has affected the uptake of DRM, if there's just not as much demand as there might have been without cell phones that have FM radios.
Of course, I can't really answer that. It's All India Radio is the organization that's buying the transmitters from Nautel. I believe it's the public radio system there in India, and I presume that people would want to listen to that. That's probably news and other programs, but really couldn't say. But I agree with what you're saying. It's possible that there's so many FM radios out there that people might not have a huge amount of interest even in the new technology. Of course, what do they really care, right? So
interestingly, I don't know if it still is, but it used to be that no commercial outfit was allowed to write, produce, and broadcast news, that this had to come from All India Radio. I don't know if that's still the case, but at least 5, 6, 7 years ago, when I was going to India on a somewhat regular basis, that was the case. You couldn't do your own news. So you think All India Radio, for that reason, would have a lot of popularity there?
Yeah, we're all accustomed to the way radio works in the U.S., but it's pretty unique, I think. You go to other parts of the world, and radio, as you mentioned, is under a lot of government control, and there's just not as much commercial access and different business standpoint in a lot of parts of the world vis-a-vis the U.S. anyway.
And interestingly, in some ways, the rules that they have in other countries, especially where there's a lot more government involvement, that has an interesting effect of reducing, in some places eliminating, but reducing competition. So, for example, in Australia, you do have a fair number of community broadcasters, small stations. I think they're more powerful than our LPFMs here, but still they're relatively small. But you have a very small number of big stations. So imagine, if you will, that imagine, if you will, in the U.S. that iHeart and Cumulus and Entercom, CBS were each allowed 2 stations in a market, and that was all. And any other stations would be little pipsqueak stations. What would your business look like if you only had 5 or 6 competitors in your market instead of 20 viable competitors, or at least 9, 10, 11, 12 viable competitors? That'd be pretty interesting. And it's the effect that I've seen in Australia is that you go into any station in Australia, and you go to a lot of stations in Australia, and they all look like big market stations. They all have a lot of money behind them. They all have beautiful green rooms and fantastic studios and palatial setups, and lots of people working. I mean, like, I've looked out over a gallery of 80 people just doing alternative media and social at an Australian radio station. It's kind of overwhelming. Wouldn't that be interesting if we had the same setup here?
That would be very interesting. It would be great if we could do that here. I think that would be really nice. Actually, all the extra people part. I mean, as far as the competition goes, only having 2 stations. Well, I mean, if there were just less stations in the market, like, for example, if you took Los Angeles, instead of having 50 stations that are out there competing, if you only had 15, you can imagine that each station is going to have a lot more impact in terms of how they get people to advertise and so forth on the station. I mean, there'd be a lot less competition for sales, I would think. So I could see in that case where there'd probably be more people working here. It'd kind of be like going back to the days before streaming media, when there wasn't nearly as much competition for ad sales. I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I'm personally not advocating for this. I just think it's an interesting study. And it's, I guess, from an economic point of view, it's all fairly predictable. If the government limits your competition, then you get more of the market. And if you have more of the market, it looked to me like a lot of the radio stations in Australia were pretty well operated. Now, probably helps not having a lot of competition, but they were doing well, despite the fact that they weren't monopolies, but they didn't have a lot of competition. So it's interesting, Doug, and you've been to other countries, or you've talked to people in other countries. It's amazing the enthusiasm for radio in other countries that sometimes we lack here. Maybe in Los Angeles, you still got a good deal of enthusiasm. You got a big operation and cool people and big stars and stuff like that, or maybe not. I don't know, but there's some places where I feel like enthusiasm for radio has waned a bit. It's not fun like it was in 1984. You know what I mean?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do know what you mean. Yes, I agree too.
So, hey, Doug, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the technical things about radio, so on-demand radio and how that's changing workflows, both in IT, engineering, and for the on-air people, for the talent, and maybe how that's affecting business models. What are your salespeople out there selling? We're going to talk about the main studio rule, and we're going to focus for a few minutes on IT, because Doug, you're in charge of or either in charge of or work with, I'm sorry, I didn't ask, plenty of IT people that are necessary to keep your place going. So it's as we know, the audio engineer, the transmitter engineer, we're important, but there's other people that have a place too. Our show, This Week in Radio Tech, is brought to you by our friends at Broadcast Supply Worldwide, bswusa.com. Let's hear a quick message from them. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Frank Furter. As you know, week after week since 1973, it's been BSW's honor selling products to broadcasters worldwide for the best possible prices and speedy, zippy delivery. How do we do it? Let's show you the magic.
Welcome to the fictitious BSW Sale Factory. This is where all the products that are put on sale are staged and, once ordered, are placed on high-speed conveyors.
The Henry Engineering 6-Mix 6-Channel Broadcast Console. 10 inputs and 6 channels for $5.95. Over $550 off. Now, back to the factory.
No other sale factory in the world uses such amazing technology. Here, a BSW-trained computer technician at work. Looks like he's adding that Wi-Fi that we've been hearing so much about. Great job, Billy. See? You turn the knobs and then BSW exclusive deals pop out. It's that easy. See, Billy?
Interested in podcasting or internet radio? BSW's Going Pro Kit Dual with PR40 microphones will have you broadcasting in style on the WWWs in no time. Only $12.69. Now, back to the factory.
At the BSW Sale Factory, workers are on double speed to route your emails and direct your calls to our happy sales representatives.
Introducing the BSW Orban Demo Program. Want to hear what the best processing in the business sounds like before you change lives with its amazing sound? Call BSW today and ask for a demo on Orban processing. Now back to the BSW Sale Factory.
Operating a sale factory requires exact timing and product planning to make sure the products you want to buy are priced low and ready for immediate shipment. On behalf of the entire BSW staff, thank you for watching, and don't forget to buy stuff.
Thanks to BSW for sponsoring this. I was laughing so hard I'm bouncing my monitor. Sorry about that. Remember, if you order by 7 p.m. Eastern time, then there's a good chance they can put it on a plane and have it to you tomorrow. If that's what you want, you can have overnight shipping from their big warehouse in Columbus, Ohio. Thanks again, bswusa.com. Our guest is Doug Irwin, and let's see if Chris Tobin is connected any better at the moment. I told Chris we'd check back in with him. Maybe he's standing by. Chris, are you there? See, I have no way of knowing. Just to ask. Well, I don't see or hear from Chris, and I think that our producer would switch to him if he was there and had a good signal. So maybe we get a comment from him at the end of the show. All right, yeah, Chris is at a venue where he was lied to. He said he was promised a certain level of connectivity, and no, he's not getting that. But I'm Kirk Harnack, and our guest on this episode 384 of This Week in Radio Tech is Doug Irwin. Doug is the editor of Radio Magazine. And Doug, I don't know if you remember or not, I was very pleased to be asked to write for that magazine many years ago when I was a full-time contract engineer. You were just a young lad then, though.
Well, I don't know if it was Chris Scherer doing the editing right back in those days. Probably so. Chris did it for 17 years, and he engaged a lot of different authors, including myself. So I started off with Chris as well. So. Yeah, radio. We talked about earlier. Unfortunately, the print edition of Radio Magazine is out of print now, along with the electronic version. So Radio Magazine still exists as a webpage called Radio Mag Online, and we also have a 3 times a week newsletter that goes out. So those of you that are interested in that, you can subscribe. Check out the page radiomagonline.com, and that's where you can find that. And we put a lot of effort and time into getting good content for that webpage. So I recommend you look at it.
Well, I get the I get the newsletter, and I always skim it and look over, are there any headlines I'm interested in? There's usually 2 or 3 that I think, oh, I need to read that. And then I'll go and then, as usual, I'll go down the rabbit hole where I'm linked to other articles that I thought, well, I haven't read that yet. And next thing I know, a good 45 minutes has gone by. and I've read, 14 of your stories. So yeah, that's what happens to me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it's been something I've been involved with for a long time, and still trying to make things that are worth reading and trying to find information for people that I think is important. Especially one thing we cover a lot of, that you may have noticed, is we talk a lot about cellular telephone technology and Wi-Fi technology, because I look at that as being the real competitor to radio. Is streaming media. I mean, it's pretty obvious. So it's important to know what the capabilities are of streaming media, and a large part of that is the final mile from the cell telephone base station to your phone. And so we spend an awful lot of time in space in the newsletter talking about new technology, 4G LTE, obviously, 5G. We spend a lot of time talking about that. So if you want to learn something about those new technologies, you should check out our webpage, because we cover that constantly. So, well,
that's a good point. And actually, that dovetails right into a topic we're scheduled to talk about, and that is on-demand radio, because streaming doesn't depend on a single transmitter outputting a single thing. It's a two-way street. We ask for something and we get it back. And so you mentioned, Doug, you said that these are competitors to radio, and yes, there are plenty of competitors to radio. But the good news is broadcasters can use the exact same technology and same workflows. They just have to modify their own workflows and their procedures and what they're putting out to the public. So, some people would argue that, hey, folks these days are less interested in listening to a full program or a linear stream, a linear program. They're more interested in curating something or having something curated for them. So I find myself doing more of the latter and less of the former. Once in a while, honestly, if I'm being lazy, I'll turn the radio on or turn the television on. But if I'm not being lazy, I'll go choose something that I think probably exists out there, or I'll look it up, or I'll go to YouTube recommendations. Somehow I'll get recommended what to listen to. And I listen to a lot on YouTube. Isn't that weird? I turn the phone off and let the audio stream to me. And again, the good news is that radio can take advantage of this, because we are professional content creators. We're good at making stuff for the ear and maybe for the eye as we move along. Tell me your thoughts about this. iHeart has been a huge player in this area, of course, streaming all or most of your radio stations, but making plenty of on-demand content available. Would you talk to us a little bit about that and how you fit into all that whole world?
The streaming media that you would pick up from the station has a lot more to do with the IT people who are here, actually. There's 10 people in engineering and IT here, and we've got, I think I mentioned before, we've got 4 that do IT, we've got 6 in engineering, but they have kind of taken over that particular aspect of the business. And also because they, in our particular case here in Los Angeles, the IT people maintain our next-gen system, and the streaming media is generated by that means. I mean, there's other machines that are running next-gen. They have the same music log, and when we have a stop set, we play that instead, and when that's over, we go back to the music. So very similar. It's just another computer application, essentially. As far as on-demand goes, of course, the whole on-demand technology is what has made organizations like Netflix, Hulu, etc., come into being. I'm surprised that on-demand hasn't really taken off for radio prior to this. I guess it's getting to be the hottest thing right now. We are we're going to be changing the way we do our on-demand radio here before too long. I can't really talk about it. I don't have all the details yet. I just know there's a change coming. It's going to make it easier for us. It's going to improve the workflow situation. We're probably going to have a lot more programs available on demand, would be my guess. Since we're in a top 50 market, PPM is important. All the on-demand, all the podcasts will have PPM audio. So if you listen within 24 hours, we'll get credit for it, assuming you're a PPM panelist. And but I can't really say it's not modifying workflow for engineering. Really, it's a lot more of a programming thing. And with the companies that are providing the service, are kind of doing it in the background too. I mean, that's part of their business plan, is to make it easy for us so that we don't have to do much. They're trying to automate it as much as they possibly can, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I thought was going to you were going to say. And so the people in IT and the people who write Next Gen come up with new ideas. I guess they've created workflows that happen. I wouldn't say necessarily automatically, but they have a great deal of automation. You do a good show, you do a good bit on the radio, or maybe you produce something that is not broadcast on the radio, but just for the on-demand audience. Then you've got concerts, and I know, a company like with the power of iHeart, you have the ability to make an agreement with an artist or with their management company to not play them live in the studio, but also to make that performance available online. Is live performance a big deal at your place?
Well, not for being carried on the radio. No, I mean, we have the iHeart Theater right here in Los Angeles, where there are shows put on, and of course there's a iHeart Theater in New York City as well. But those shows are produced for the people who are coming to see them, for one thing, and also for online viewing later on. But it's I guess I have to qualify all of that or characterize all of that as on-demand content, but not carried on the radio live. No.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, I know that there are some people in the companies in the streaming business, and before, when we were talking earlier today, you mentioned Futuri and StreamGuys, and these are both companies familiar to me and a lot of engineers. We see them at the trade shows. My friend Craig Bowman works for Futuri in Cleveland, Ohio, and Craig and I have talked a lot in one of the Futuri products. Actually, one of their streaming encoders has Omnia processing built into it. So, if for a lot of stations that never thought about putting processing on their stream, well, you've got some gentle processing right there built in. But Craig says that they are signing, plenty of people up for their on-demand service. And the streaming just kind of, throw in the streaming too. In other words, Futuri itself and broadcasters that are signing up are perhaps a bit less interested in real-time, ongoing, 24/7 linear streaming than they are in automating ways to put best of stuff on a server, and then what's the word I'm looking for? Making that available. Oh gosh, I can't think of the right word now. But surfacing, I think is the right word. Surfacing that to people on Facebook and Twitter and other social media, where they will see it and become aware of it, and that, I didn't hear them give away that $15,000 this morning. I'll click on that and hear who won that. So that's the kind of thing that I think is becoming at least somewhat popular for short form programming. Any thoughts about that?
I think it's absolutely true. I'm surprised that there hasn't been more of that in radio. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, the real-time aspect is really not that important. I mean, you see how it is in television too. I mean, why do I need to be sitting in front of the TV at 9 o'clock to watch a Seinfeld rerun when I can get it on Hulu or anything else any other time? Same with radio, but it is important to make sure people know, of course, that it's become available. And I know that part of what StreamGuys and Futuri and Wide Orbit do is make sure that information gets disseminated so that people know right away that it's available, because otherwise it's kind of pointless if no one knows they can get it, right? So,
yeah. So one of the things that you're going to be hearing about, and I don't know who all is doing this now. In the last couple of weeks, I got to spend some time with Dan McQuillan at Broadcast Bionics, and like so many other manufacturers, they're presenting their own ideas about what would radio look like in the future? What are consumers wanting to demand or wanting to get from it? And they have some interesting products that one of them's already out and some more coming out that do near real-time speech-to-text work, and then that text gets put back into the file or gets attached with the audio file, so you can bring that into your editor, your audio editor, like Adobe Audition, and you can edit based on text. So if you want to see, hey, where did my guest this morning talk about, I don't know, talk about the Parkland, Florida shooting? Type in Parkland, and bam, 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 it surfaces all the places in the audio that was mentioned, and now you can go edit. You can actually edit on a touch screen just by touching, you know, the words that you want, and say, oh yeah, that was the segment right there that I want to grab that and use it. And it can be audio plus video too if you're doing associated video. So the point there, I think, is that different companies are coming out with interesting tools, and as engineers and as, you know, leaders in broadcasting, I think as an engineer, my job is to help management of a radio station and programming people make good decisions about what they're going to do. What can we implement right away? What's going to take a lot of money? What seems like it's going to work for us? I would imagine iHeart and maybe even stations that you've consulted or worked with in the past are kind of in that same boat. They're looking at what's going to work for them for the future.
They are, but I think there's a lot of hesitation to make changes and do things in new ways. What you were describing earlier about the text and being able to go back and search on words, that sounds like a huge benefit for anybody, the workflow for anybody doing production, especially in the news department. But my experience has been that a lot of programmers don't really want to change the way they do things that rapidly. I mean, we've suggested things before that I think would be great. Hey, here's a good way to get new social media. Here's a good way to disseminate pictures and videos and so forth. And they're like, well, we're kind of already doing that, and you know, we're okay. Thanks for letting us know. So I don't think it's quite as much of that as you would think. And I can't generalize because I you know, my experience is limited to where I've worked, but my hunch is that places I've worked are similar to others in terms of that. So
something else that's been in the news lately is this main studio rule. And, you know, you see opinions on both sides when it was announced and when it happened. And, you know, some of the people saying, well, there goes radio. It's over with now. There's the final coffin, a final nail in radio's coffin. And other people are saying, thank goodness, now we don't have to spend money where it wasn't doing us any good in the first place. And we're going to continue our programming the same way, but now we don't have to have somebody sitting in an office in this town that has, you know, maybe literally 400 residents. Talk to me about the main studio rule now that it's passed. And what are you hearing that stations, any changes that they're doing in their operations because of it?
Well, of course, the main studio rule was essentially dead after January 8th. And we had a main studio up in a town called Mojave. And because we've got two stations up in the high desert, and that it was serving as their main studio. But the reality is their manager was there, but what did they really do? What did they really have to do with the programming of the station? I mean, it was really nothing because all the programming is coming up from Los Angeles. The two stations there are essentially just high-power translators for two LA stations. So that person wasn't really accommodating or accomplishing too much. And, of course, they were there so that if anybody in the community needed to come by and see the public file, they could do that. Well, I don't think that ever happened. It was all ready to go for them. Had they decided to come by and check it, it was there. But I don't think that ever happened. So personally, I'm kind of glad to see the main studio rule go. It just, from an engineering standpoint, it's just made our lives that much easier. I can only speak for myself. I'm sure there are other locations where people are sad to see them go. And if their main studio was actually used to originate some kind of unique programmer or something, that would be one thing. Yeah, I would say, wow, it's too bad we lost that, but it just wasn't.
So of course, my feeling is that if a city of license, and we have so many situations where the city of license is not the city of financial interest, right? I own a station like that. I'm part owner of a station that's licensed to Moorhead, Mississippi, which is, excuse me, folks of Moorhead, I'm sorry, but it's a wide spot in the road. And the city of financial interest is Greenwood, Mississippi. Not that it's that big, it's 15,000 people, but it's bigger than Moorhead. And so, you know, the station's licensed to Moorhead, and actually because of the coverage, we didn't have to have a facility in Moorhead anyway, but it would be silly for us to have a facility in Moorhead. The concerns of the people in Moorhead are virtually the same as the concerns of the people in Greenwood, and it's to our station's best financial interest to serve everybody within our coverage area, including those in the city of actual license, even though it's only 400 people or whatever it may be. So I believe that if it wasn't in a station's financial interest to serve their city of license, they probably weren't doing a very good job of it anyway. And if it is in their financial interest, the main studio rule doesn't matter. They're going to serve that town with programming or ad sales or news coverage or whatever it may be. If you know, people aren't going to do what there's zero financial interest in doing, because you can't pay the bills that way. Am I off base, or am I somewhere in the right?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And with the march of technology and evolution of technology, there was no need for people to be able to go in through an office and open up a file cabinet and look at a public file. You get all of the stuff online and the exact same material. So I think it has a lot to do with the evolution of technology as well. It's just no need for a standalone office with a public file. It's just, I'm glad it's over, but you know, I'm sure there are cases where it would have been better, but in mine, no.
You know, I wish nostalgia paid the bills, but it doesn't. Hey, actually, that's a great time. Doug, if you want to mute for a second, we're going to take our last break. When we come back, Doug is going to have a couple of final thoughts on IT people in, you know, taking care of audio gear and what the implications are nowadays. There was a time when I think that was a pretty tough situation. In other words, the broadcast engineers didn't like it a lot because we felt like IT people weren't doing a good job of taking care of broadcast operations. But a lot of things have changed, and Doug indicates that it's actually working out pretty well now. So we're going to take a look at that when we come back with a final thought. Right now, we're going to hear a quick message from the folks at the TELUS Alliance. We'll be right back.
You need an audio processor. And that's when my ears perked up. Oh, what? Tell me about this. And it goes, I don't know, it's a box that splits the audio into 3 bands and puts them all back together. It basically makes a radio station sound louder than it really is. At least that's what my friend says. That sounds exactly like what I need. It needs more sparkle. It needs more of this. I need more thump. There's a control that if you turn up thump, okay, it's programmed to turn this, tune that, tune this by that much, tune that by that much, tune this over here by this much, and diddle these other controls that normally would be corny only access controls to give you more thump. But along the way, Frank goes, Cordy, this dynamic EQ, it's amazing. I think this may have some application for audio processing. Play with it. Now, the point of a bass clipper is to try to keep the bass from creating high-frequency intermod distortion on the main clipper. Each of the bands can hone in on their individual spectrum, you know, the way they should. You can build up nice RMS loudness without having to worry about also loading onto them the EQ balance. Basically, what I hear and what other people hear is that the audio takes on, it's like taking a 2D picture and making it 3D. On the surface, that sounds like weird, but the proof is in what you hear on the air.
I had a blast interviewing Cornelius Gould for that interview. It is an hour and a half long, so it's a lengthy interview. You know, the kind of thing you turn on, listen to the background, and if you find something that really interesting, perk your ears up and take a listen. But it tells all about Corny's early experience with processing, how he got to the point where we are now, and how we got to the amazing GeForce upgrade for the Omnia 11. Oh wow! All right, I'll have the link in the show notes for the full video. Okay. Hey, we're just about done talking to Doug Irwin, and Doug, this notion about the battle between broadcast engineers and IT guys, and it seems like for some years, I want to say in the early part of the 2000s, it just seemed like a battle. Like the IT guys were messing things up for the broadcast engineers, and we may have gone off the air because the IT guy didn't think something was important, and as a broadcast engineer, a lot of them felt like the IT guys just don't get it. And I think you've indicated to me that that's getting better now. And IT is an incredibly important part of broadcasting at a lot of operations. And maybe you have some insight on that. Tell me what you think.
Well, IT and engineering are integrated very well here at iHeart in Los Angeles. I mean, Clint Sago is the head of IT, and I'm the head of engineering. We work as partners here in this department. We have a great relationship, and it's true that more and more aspects of the daily operation are being handled by IT. Like, for example, I mentioned NextGen earlier. They deal with that, but we have one person who kind of crosses over between NextGen maintenance and other stuff, and then in other stuff in engineering. That was his original position. He does it very well. But I also mentioned that with the coming of the VX system, the telephone system, there's even more integration with IT and engineering, because there's so many aspects of VX that would formerly be known strictly as IT issues. All the IP connectivity and so forth. I mean, that's the heart of the system. So they are getting more accustomed to dealing with audio, and also the 24/7 nature of it. I mean, a lot of IT issues in the past have been, well, we're just here to deal with the salespeople. When they go home, we go home, and we don't hear anything about it over the weekend. Well, it doesn't work that way anymore. We have things that happen over the weekend. Like I mentioned, the NextGen system, clearly it's running all the time. And the VX system will be running all the time as well. So there's more and more partnerships, I guess you could say, and it's working out really well. And I think more and more groups are going to see that.
Do you find more willingness or more cooperation from the IT people to have somebody on call overnight and on weekends?
That's mainly engineering stuff still, but they have their issues that come up over the weekend as well. They have to solve. That happens occasionally.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know for my part, my goodness, this whole audio over IP has made my job so amazingly easier. In fact, yesterday afternoon, I got an email from one of our on-air talents in Mississippi, and he said, "Hey, I really want these two channels on the board to be swapped. I'd like this to be in position number 4 and that to be in position number 8, not the way they are now. Can you do that?" And I wrote him back. I said, "Sure, I can do that." And so, within literally 4 minutes, I had the layout changed, and all he had to do was reload his morning show profile, and bam, that took care of that. Then he also asked in the same email, he said, "I want to be able to go back and listen to my show and edit out best of stuff for promos," because we hadn't hooked that up yet. It's a brand new radio station. I just hadn't hooked that up yet. And he started asking a bunch of questions about our streaming company. Can I do it through the streaming company and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what? It's a lot easier than that. I'll install the software tonight. So I installed the iProfiler logging software from my friends at the Telos Alliance, and installed the client, little client software on his production computer, and bam, his morning show this morning got recorded without him even knowing about it. And then we hooked up on the phone earlier, and I remoted in and showed him how to use the client software and how to save out, files, and he could open them in Audition and so forth. So I did all that from Nashville, Tennessee, and he's halfway down in Mississippi. So yeah, I love the tools that we have now. It would have been, a few years ago, this would have been a 7-hour drive each way to set that up. Isn't that amazing?
Remote access is a wonderful thing. I will tell you that much. Can't live without it.
It sure is. Hey, I didn't mention, I forgot to mention, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if we usually give a tip before we go, just a kind of a final thing. Is there any website that you really like? Is there an SPE program that you would highly recommend? Is there a book, a pamphlet, some learning that maybe new hires you want to make sure that they know about? What advice can you leave with our listeners, Doug, to send them on their way with something to do?
Well, the best book to have now is the 11th edition of the NAB Engineering Handbook. It just came out. It's absolutely fantastic. It's like the sum knowledge of radio and television broadcasting in one book. So I would get that if I would absolutely. It's a little bit expensive, but it's worth it.
It is. Now, do you have a chapter in that yourself?
I do have a chapter in that myself, and it's an update. In other words, I took a chapter that was there previously in the 10th edition, took some stuff out, added some stuff in, and so it's not brand new by any stretch of imagination. It's probably about 50% original and 50% new.
Well, that is great advice. I absolutely love that book, and I was going to try to reach over here and grab it, but it's out of arm's reach. But it's the NAB Engineering Handbook 11th edition, and Joe Talbot and I were asked to write a chapter on that as well. Actually, I was asked, and I thought, you know what, Joe Talbot really has a lot to add to this, so I brought Joe in on that. And yeah, good book, and it's a couple $100, but man, it's worth it. By the way, the SBE has kind of a similar book. It's a little smaller, but the SBE has a book as well. I can highly recommend both of them, but yeah, make sure you have one, either or both. Doug, I appreciate you taking an hour of your precious time away there in Los Angeles to be with us. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun this time.
And I'll see you in Las Vegas. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll try to get a little quick video interview there and have you back on the show sometime when I get my tower light fixed. How about that?
I'll have my tower light ready to display next time for sure.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Doug Irwin. And he's the editor of Radio Magazine. It's Radio Mag Online, and also the vice president of engineering at iHeart in Los Angeles. Big responsibility there. And I've known Doug for years, and he does fine work. He's full of great ideas. All right. And Chris Tobin, we checked in a couple times, couldn't raise him up. Don't know if his connectivity came back. Hopefully he'll be with us next week. Coming up a few weeks from now, we've got a fantastic interview with a fellow from way up north in the Yukon of Canada. No, not Yukon Cornelius. It's a fellow who has software it's open source radio station software that runs either on your own server or in the cloud to run a radio station in the cloud. Pretty interesting stuff. You stick around for that. We'll have that for you. Hey, tell your friends about This Week in Radio Tech. Thanks to our sponsors as well, and big thanks to Suncast, the producer of our show, and to Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network. Tell your friends, and we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.